The cards are still in the dealer's hand, the felt glows softly beneath the overhead light, and a small stack of chips waits in front of you, quiet, untouched, ready. Around the table there's only the sound of breathing, shuffling, and the occasional click of plastic against plastic. This is poker at its calmest moment, before the action, before the noise, when thought begins to stir. Welcome to this session. Tonight, we're not chasing adrenaline or drama. We're slowing down and understanding what really happens beneath the surface of Texas Hold'em, not as a game of luck, but as a rhythm of choices, patience, and awareness. You don't need to know every chart or memorize every term. All you need is an open mind and the willingness to sit quietly with the game until it begins to make sense. If you enjoy learning the quiet side of poker, the way patience turns into profit, the way calm observation beats chaos, take a second to subscribe or leave a comment. It helps more players find their way to this same table, and it keeps this little community growing. Now, take a breath. Feel the weight of the chips under your fingers. That sound, that tiny clink, is the pulse of the game. You're about to learn how to play Texas Hold'em with real understanding, not just rules. We'll move gently, step by step, through the structure of each hand and each decision, from the opening cards to the quiet reflection after a hand is done. Most players rush. They focus on the thrill, winning pots, chasing luck, showing bluffs. But this is a slower kind of study. It's about learning why things happen, why you fold certain hands, raise others, and how those small, consistent choices shape your whole experience at the table. You're going to see that poker isn't about guessing what the other person holds. It's about learning to see clearly, to understand what the situation allows and what it doesn't. At its heart, Texas Hold'em is simple. 2 cards in your hand, 5 shared on the board. But beneath that simplicity lies an entire universe of logic and timing. Every decision connects to another. Every fold teaches you something. Every hand, even the ones you lose, builds your sense of pattern and proportion. The goal of this guide isn't to turn you into an expert overnight. It's to show you the steady path that real players walk. So what makes a beginner's strategy different from everything you might see online or in highlight reels? It's the understanding that every strong foundation starts with discipline and awareness. Not flashy plays, not wild bluffs, just consistency. The courage to fold, the clarity to wait, and the calmness to play strong hands with confidence. If you picture poker as a storm of emotions and noise, think of this as the quiet eye at its center. Here, we'll rebuild the basics from the ground up. You'll learn why starting hands matter more than any clever trick, why position dictates power, and why most mistakes come not from ignorance, but impatience. The structure of what you'll learn is simple. First, we'll uncover the foundational ideas that every good player stands on, the unseen logic that turns confusion into understanding. Then we'll follow a hand through its natural rhythm, pre-flop, flop, turn and river. You'll see how the choices evolve, how discipline carries through, and how emotion is managed, not avoided. From there, we'll build your plan, the way you decide what to play, when to fold, and how to stay steady through variance and luck. We'll move beyond cash games to tournaments, where stack sizes shrink and time becomes pressure. We'll look at the emotional side, the tilt, the frustration, and the ego, and we'll practice calm recovery, hand after hand. Later, you'll peek at higher level thought, reading patterns, adjusting frequencies, and knowing when to trust intuition. But right now, in this opening moment, none of that matters yet. All you need to know is that Texas Hold'em rewards awareness. It's a game built on patience. The players who last aren't the loudest. They're the ones who can sit through hundreds of hands waiting for the right one without losing focus or faith. That's the habit we're building here. In a world full of noise, poker can become a kind of meditation, a steady return to observation. You'll make mistakes, you'll fold winners, you'll misread situations, and every time, if you stay aware, you'll come back a little clearer. This is the deeper gift of the game. It teaches you to think calmly under pressure, to manage uncertainty with grace, and to find peace in patience. So before we begin, take another slow breath. This table is your classroom now. These cards, your lessons. By the end, you won't just understand Texas Hold'em. You'll understand how to think like a player who belongs here. Poker begins long before the first card is dealt. It begins with how you think. Before you can act, raise or fold, you need a foundation. a way of understanding what's happening beneath the surface of every hand. This is where most beginners struggle, not because the rules are complicated, but because their thoughts are unanchored. They react instead of reason. They chase feelings instead of patterns. To build a solid poker mindset, you must start with 3 ideas: position, patience, and perception. These are not advanced tricks. They are the invisible framework that separates guessing from thinking. Without them, every decision becomes noise. With them, the game begins to quiet down and patterns start to appear. Position means where you sit in relation to the dealer, and by extension, when you act. It's the most underestimated concept in all of beginner poker, and yet it shapes every single hand. When you act early, you have less information. You don't know who will raise behind you or what strength they might hold. Acting late means you've seen others act first. You can use their decisions as clues. The later your position, the more control you have. Beginners often play too many hands from early positions, not realizing that even good cards lose value when played in the dark. Patience is the second pillar. Poker is a waiting game disguised as a fast one. The pace of the cards, the clicking chips, and the constant flow of bets can make it feel like you're supposed to be doing something every hand, but the truth is, most hands are meant to be folded. Waiting for the right opportunities is not weakness. It's control. It's the art of letting the game come to you. Perception is the third pillar, understanding what others see when they look at you. Beginners often play as if their own cards are the only thing that exists. They forget that poker is a conversation of action. Every time you check, bet, or raise, you're saying something about what you might have. And every time your opponent acts, they're saying something back. Most of these messages are half-truths, but when you start listening carefully, you begin to read patterns instead of random behavior. Together, these 3 principles form the base of sound poker play. You learn when to act, when to wait, and how to interpret what's happening around you. Every concept that follows, starting hands, bet sizing, bluffing, or strategy, connects back to them. Now let's talk about the mindset that supports this framework. At the table, there are 2 versions of you, the emotional player and the analytical observer. The emotional player reacts to the outcomes, the missed flops, the bad beats, the pots lost to lucky rivers. The analytical observer watches patterns unfold and looks for logic. The longer you can keep your observer in charge, the calmer your play becomes. Emotion may spike, but the observer stays steady, measuring risk and reward without bias. One of the biggest beginner mistakes is assuming that poker is about winning hands. It's not. It's about making good decisions. You can win a hand and still play it terribly. You can lose a hand and still play it perfectly. In the short term, luck creates noise. In the long term, correct reasoning filters it out. Every decision you make is a small vote toward your future success. Here's a simple example. Imagine you're dealt ace-king, and before the flop, an opponent moves all in. If they're the type to only shove with aces or kings, calling would be bad, even though your hand looks strong. But if they shove often with weaker hands like ace-queen or small pairs, calling could be profitable. The key isn't your cards, it's what their action tells you. The same hand can be good or bad depending on the situation. That's why poker isn't solved by the memorization, it's solved by awareness. You're not learning what to do, you're learning how to think. Another common mistake is believing that folding means you're missing out. Many beginners feel pressure to stay involved, especially after waiting several hands. They start playing marginal hands, weak aces, suited connectors, small pairs, from the wrong positions, thinking, it's my turn to play something. But poker doesn't reward impatience. Every hand you fold sharpens your ability to recognize the right one when it comes. To illustrate, picture 2 players sitting side by side. One plays almost every hand. They win a few small pots, but they lose more often than they win. Their stack rises and falls like waves. The other player folds quietly, waiting, watching. When they finally enter a pot, it's with purpose. Their stack doesn't move as much, but over time it grows, slowly, steadily. That's the real rhythm of the game. Let's look at one more example, a contrast between impulsive and grounded play. You're in middle position with Queen 10 suited. The table folds to you. You decide to raise. The players behind you call. The flop comes Ace, King, 7, all different suits. You missed completely, but your brain starts whispering, maybe they missed it. You decide to bluff, hoping everyone folds. Someone calls. The turn is another low card. You fire again, trying to force them out. They call once more. The river is blank. Now you're lost. You've spent half your stack with no real plan, all because you started from impulse instead of awareness. Now imagine the same hand, but played with patience. You raise, get called, see the flop, and immediately recognize it doesn't help you. Instead of forcing a story that doesn't exist, you check, observe, and fold when appropriate. You lose a small pot, but save your stack for better opportunities. That's the difference between chaos and structure. The foundational principle here is clarity. Every decision must serve a purpose. You're not here to fight every battle. You're here to choose the ones worth fighting, and to walk away from the rest without hesitation. As you begin to play more, you'll notice that poker rewards restraint. It rewards observation over reaction, and long-term discipline over short-term emotion. You'll learn that good players don't just win hands, they survive bad runs, they adapt, and they keep their mental balance intact. That's the foundation we're building. Position gives you perspective. Patience keeps you grounded. Perception connects you to the table. And together, they create the calm awareness that allows you to play your best poker no matter what the cards bring. When you sit down next time, remember, every hand begins with thought. Not cards, not chips, thought. Once that thought becomes steady, everything else will follow. Every hand in Texas Hold'em is a story told in 4 chapters: pre-flop, flop, turn, and river. Each street reveals a little more, but only to the players who know how to listen. The cards are just part of it. The real story is in the choices you make as the hand unfolds. To understand the rhythm of poker, imagine yourself as both the author and the reader. You set the tone with your decisions, but you also interpret what others are writing with theirs. The key is to move through each street with awareness, adjusting your plan as new information appears, never clinging to what was true a moment ago. Let's start at the beginning, the pre-flop. This is where structure matters most. Before the community cards are dealt, you only have 2 pieces of information: your hole cards and your position. Yet those 2 details are enough to build a plan. Good players decide before the flop what their hand is trying to accomplish. Beginners, on the other hand, often act without direction. They limp in without knowing why, call raises with no plan for the later streets, or raise simply because they feel like being aggressive. Pre-flop play is about discipline. It's the act of filtering your hands through logic, not emotion. Early position means tighter selection, only strong starting hands like big pairs, high aces, and strong Broadway combinations. Late position allows more creativity because you'll act after others and can control the size of the pot more easily. Each seat shifts your strategy slightly, and the sooner you internalize that, the steadier your play becomes. The best pre-flop players treat every hand as a question. What story am I about to tell? If you raise, you're representing strength. If you call, you're implying caution or deception. Every action has meaning. Even folding has purpose. It's how you maintain balance, control, and reputation at the table. Now the flop comes, the first 3 community cards. This is where many players lose their clarity. The flop changes everything, but it also tempts overreaction. A missed flop can feel like failure, but in truth, most flops will miss your hand. The real skill lies in reading how the flop connects with ranges, not just your own. Let's say you raise pre-flop with ace-king and got 1 caller. The flop comes 9-5-2 rainbow. You missed completely, but your opponent likely did too. You had the initiative pre-flop, so a small continuation bet here can often win the pot. You're not bluffing wildly, you're following the logic of the situation. Your story makes sense. A strong pre-flop raiser would often continue here. But notice what happens when beginners bet every flop automatically. They stop thinking about context. The strength of a continuation bet depends on board texture, number of opponents, and stack sizes. Betting into 3 players on a connected flop like 10 Jack-Queen is completely different from betting heads up on a dry board. The best players adjust, sometimes checking back strong hands, sometimes betting with air, but always doing it for a reason. When you're on the flop, ask yourself 3 questions. Does this board favour my range or theirs? What do I want to accomplish by betting? Value, protection, or bluff? What story will this bet tell later in the hand? Those 3 questions turn chaos into clarity. They make the game logical again. The turn is the moment where patience truly begins to pay off. By now the pot is larger, and the decisions carry more weight. Many players panic here, unsure how to continue. They fire a second barrel out of fear, or check automatically because they don't want to lose more. But the turn is not about fear, it's about re-evaluation. Every new card reshapes the story. The board texture changes, ranges shift, and stack sizes matter even more. This is where the game becomes quiet and psychological. Good players slow down here. They think, what changed? Who gained equity? Who lost it? They measure rather than react. Suppose you raised with King-Queen and you got one caller. The flop came Jack-10-3, giving you an open-ended straight draw. You bet, that they call. The turn brings a fawn, a blank. You could fire again trying to represent an overpair, but you realise something. Your opponent's call on the flop likely means they have at least a pair or a draw. If you keep betting blindly, you're building a pot with nothing. Instead, you check back, keeping the pot manageable. The river could bring your straight or not, but you've kept your stack safe while staying in the story. That's controlled play. The river is the final chapter, the resolution. It's where all the stories meet their end. Some players dread it, others chase it, but the wise ones treat it as a summary, a final test of logic. By the river, the pot is big and decisions become emotional. Yet this is exactly where calmness becomes your greatest edge. If you've planned your hand logically from pre-flop onward, the river rarely surprises you. You already know what hand you could represent and which ones your opponent could have. The river isn't a place to guess, it's a place to conclude. Let's walk through one complete hand from start to finish. You're in late position with Ace-Queen of Hearts. Two players fold, one raises from middle position. You call, everyone else folds, you're heads up. The flop comes Queen-7-3 with two hearts. You have top pair and the nut flush should draw a strong holding. The original raiser bets half the pot. You pause, think. Raising here might scare away worse hands and only get called by better ones. So you call, keeping your range wide. The turn is a 10 of clubs. Your opponent checks this time. That pause tells a story. Maybe they have a medium-strength hand, something like pocket jacks or king-queen. You check behind, controlling the pot and giving yourself a free river. The river comes the 5 of hearts. Your flush arrives. Your opponent bets small, perhaps trying to get thin value from a worse queen. Now your plan becomes clear. You raise confidently, not huge, just enough to invite a call. They think, hesitate and pay you off. What you did in that hand wasn't flashy and it was structured. You controlled the pace, protected yourself when uncertain, and extracted value when certain. You didn't force the hand, you guided it. Contrast that with how a less experienced player might handle it. They might raise the flop aggressively, get re-raised, and panic fold a strong hand. Or they might overbet the river and scare off a call. The difference isn't luck, it's rhythm. Every hand in poker is an evolving story, and your job is to keep the story coherent. Bad players jump from one sentence to another, changing tone mid-paragraph. Good players maintain narrative consistency. They think, what would this action look like from the outside? And they play it in a way that keeps their story believable. Mastery of this process means one thing. You stop reacting and start guiding. You learn to let the cards speak without letting them control you. You fold when you should, not because you're scared, but because the story no longer fits your logic. You bet when the narrative is right. You check when patience serves you better. Once you can see each hand as a flowing sequence instead of a set of disconnected actions, the game becomes smoother. The noise fades. You're no longer asking, what should I do here? Instead, you're asking, what makes sense here? And that's the shift from playing poker to understanding poker. Every great player begins each session with a plan, not a rigid script, but a calm framework for what hands to play, from where, and why. Without that, even the most talented player will drift. A starting hand plan is what anchors your game. It's not about memorizing charts, it's about building awareness of strength, position, and purpose. The first thing to understand is that not all good hands are equal, and not all weak hands are worthless. Their value changes depending on where you sit, how deep your stack is, and who you're up against. A hand like Ace-Jack may look powerful, but in early position, it's dangerous. You'll have to act before others, and that means walking into uncertainty. But from late position, that same hand becomes a weapon. You can use position to control the pot and see how others react before committing. This is where the idea of ranges comes in. A range isn't a fixed list of hands you'll always play. It's a guideline, a map of possibilities that keeps you from drifting too far in one direction. If you play too many hands, your range becomes loose, and observant opponents will exploit you. If you play too few, you become predictable, and opponents will simply fold when you raise. Balance is the goal. Imagine your range as a circle. The strongest hands, pairs like aces, kings and queens, or premium combinations like ace-king suited, form the core. These are your dependable weapons. Around them are the secondary hands, good but vulnerable holdings like ace-queen, king-queen, or medium pairs like eights and nines. And finally, on the outer edges, you have the speculative hands, suited connectors, small pairs, or suited aces that can make strong disguised hands when they hit. The tighter your position, the smaller that circle becomes. When you act early, play only the core. In middle position, you can expand slightly, adding a few secondary hands. On the button, where you'll act last, you can include some speculative hands, the outer ring, because information is on your side. The second part of your plan is understanding pot odds and implied odds, but we'll keep it gentle. Pot odds are the ratio between what's in the pot and what it costs to continue. If the pot is $100 and it costs $20 to call, you're getting 5 to 1 on your money. That means you only need to win 1 out of every 6 times to break even. But implied odds look deeper. They consider what you might win later if your hand improves. If you're drawing to a flush, the pot odds might not justify a call right now, but if your opponent has a big hand, they're unlikely to fold. The implied odds might make it worthwhile. The trick is not to calculate every number perfectly. It's to feel the relationship between cost and potential reward. Over time, your intuition for these ratios becomes natural. The mind learns patterns the same way the eyes learn colour, quietly through repetition. Beginners often struggle here because they see hands in isolation. They look at their 2 cards and ask, "Is this good?" But that's not the right question. The better question is, how does this hand fit into the flow of the table? A hand that's bad against one group of players might be great against another. A suited connector like 7-6 might be unplayable against tight opponents who rarely pay you off, but against loose, careless players it's gold. Context shapes everything. Let's imagine a calm, thoughtful player in early position. The cards come, king-queen suited. They take a moment, breathe, and raise. Not too much, not too little, just enough to define their hand. One player calls, another folds, and the blinds follow. The hand continues with a sense of structure because that first decision came from logic, not impulse. Now imagine the same hand in the hands of an impatient player. They limp in, hoping to see a cheap flop. Suddenly, a late position player raises. Now they're stuck, unsure whether to call or fold, and they see a flop out of position miss and lose a small but unnecessary amount. It's not a disaster, but over hundreds of hands, these small leaks drain entire stacks. The difference between the 2 players wasn't the cards, it was the presence of a plan. A starting hand plan also guards against emotional play. When you know what you're supposed to be doing from each seat, the game slows down. You stop second-guessing yourself after every fold. You stop feeling guilty for not playing enough hands. You trust that patience is part of the process. It's like sailing. The wind changes constantly, but if you've set your course, you adjust, not panic. A plan gives you direction even when the waves rise. Another quiet truth about starting hands is that folding them is just as powerful as playing them. Every fold keeps your stack safe for when the odds are finally in your favour. Every time you resist the urge to chase, you strengthen the muscles of discipline that define great players. It's not exciting, but it's how real progress is made. Let's look at an example that shows why. You're in middle position with pocket eights. The player before you raises. Behind you sits a deep-stacked opponent known for aggression. Many beginners would simply call here, thinking they'll hit a set and win big, but most of the time the flop won't help. Now you're out of position with a weak pair against strong ranges, forced to navigate tough decisions. A structured player, on the other hand, might fold here and wait for a cleaner spot. It feels passive, but in the long run it's protection. From variance, from ego, and from the slow bleed of difficult spots. Structure also means knowing when to open up. Poker is not about being tight forever, it's about playing the right range at the right time. Against cautious players, widening your range slightly and applying pressure can yield steady profit. Against reckless opponents, tightening up and letting them make mistakes does the same. The art is in the adjustment, and your starting hand plan is the compass that guides those adjustments. With time, you'll begin to sense this balance intuitively. You'll recognize that playing fewer hands leads to clearer decisions. You'll feel the calm satisfaction of folding without regret, knowing that you preserved energy for the moments that truly matter. When you play with structure, poker stops feeling like chaos. The cards lose their control over you. You start to see the game as a flow of small, measured choices. None too heavy, none too rushed. In the end, your starting hand plan isn't a cage, it's a foundation. It keeps you steady until your instincts catch up. It teaches you that poker, at its core, is not about constant motion. It's about stillness, awareness, and the quiet discipline to act only when the time is right. When you find that rhythm, when you can fold, raise, or call with the same calm mind, you've built more than a strategy. You've built a way to think, and that's what turns a beginner into a player who truly belongs at the table. Poker changes when you enter a tournament. The structure is the same. 2 cards, 5 community cards, but the rhythm shifts completely. There's no reloading, no endless stack to protect you from mistakes. Every chip has a heartbeat, and when they're gone, so are you. That pressure, the awareness that every decision could be your last, is what defines tournament poker. For beginners, this change in environment can be overwhelming. In cash games, you can wait endlessly for strong spots. In tournaments, the blinds grow, the antes arrive, and time becomes an opponent of its own. You must learn to adapt your strategy as the stages progress, balancing patience with the need to act before your stack fades away. At the beginning of a tournament, when stacks are deep and blinds small, your approach should be disciplined and observant. This is your time to gather information, to watch who plays too many hands, who folds too often, who chases draws, and who bluffs recklessly. You don't need to build a huge stack early. You need to understand the personalities around you. Each player has habits, and in the early levels, those habits appear clearly because the stakes feel safe and play tight and thoughtful early on. Let others create chaos while you observe patterns. A single good read, a player who always bets small with strong hands or sighs before bluffing, can be worth more than any early double-up. You're planting mental notes that will bloom later when the pressure rises. As the blinds increase, something subtle begins to happen. Your stack shrinks in relative value. A stack that once felt comfortable now buys you fewer orbits. This is where many beginners panic, shifting from patient control to desperate motion. They start shoving hands they would have folded before, fearing that inaction means death. But panic is the tournament's silent killer. What you need instead is awareness. Learn to track your M, the number of orbits your stack can survive without playing a hand. When your M is high, you can afford patience. When it's low, you must act decisively. This awareness turns fear into calculation. You're no longer guessing when to move, you're reading the rhythm of the structure itself. Another key adjustment in tournaments is understanding stack depth. With deep stacks, poker remains a game of post-flop finesse. You can call raises, float flops, and explore creative lines. But as stacks get shallower, decisions compress. Suddenly, you're choosing between fold, shove, or fold again. Small edges become survival itself. Let's look at an example. You're in the middle stages of a tournament with 20 big blinds. You're dealt pocket nines in middle position. A player to your right raises, and 2 short stacks sit behind you. This is a classic pressure spot. With deeper stacks, you might call and see a flop, but with only 20 blinds, calling leaves you with no room to maneuver later. The better play is often to shove, forcing your opponent to make a decision for all their chips. You're not gambling recklessly, you're using the power of fold equity. That phrase, a fold equity, is what separates thoughtful tournament players from unnervous ones. Fold equity means the value you gain when opponents fold to your bet or shove. It's invisible, but it's real. In cash games, a fold just means the pot ends. In tournaments, it can mean survival. When your opponents fold, your stack grows without risk, and every extra blind you collect buys time. As the tournament progresses into the middle and late stages, the blinds increase quickly, and survival begins to depend on timing. You'll need to recognize when the table tightens and when it loosens. Sometimes aggression is your best defense. When others are afraid to bust, stealing blinds can keep you alive and even grow your stack steadily. But there's a fine balance. Too much aggression, and your due will be called down by a strong hand. Too little, and the blinds will devour you quietly. The best players are just like a tide, pushing forward when the table folds too easily, receding when the waves push back. Then comes one of the most delicate forces in tournament poker, ICM, or the independent chip model. You don't need the math, you just need the principle. As the payout bubble approaches, chips change value. Each chip you lose costs more than each chip you gain, because survival itself has monetary worth. This is why great players tighten up near the bubble, not out of fear, but because the goal shifts from chip accumulation to preservation. It's also why aggressive players thrive in that moment. They exploit others' fear. When everyone starts folding to reach the money, bold yet calculated moves can steal blinds uncontested. The key is to recognize which players are protecting their tournament life and which are willing to gamble. As you reach the final stages, the deep run, the final 2 tables, tournament poker becomes emotional. Fatigue sets in, adrenaline rises, and every pot feels monumental. This is where composure becomes everything. Mistakes multiply when excitement takes over. Picture yourself late in an event. You've outlasted hundreds. Your stack is average. Every move now echoes with consequence. The blinds are massive. A player shoves, another calls, and you look down at ace-10 suited. You pause, you think. Calling could double you up or send you home. Folding keeps you alive. In that moment, it's not the math that guides you, it's your stillness. You breathe, evaluate ranges, consider positions, then you act, not rushed, not fearful, just steady. That stillness is what tournament poker demands. It's not about hero calls or wild bluffs, it's about staying calm when others crumble. Every orbit, every decision, every fold is part of the same long arc toward the finish. And if you reach the final table, everything changes again. Stacks are uneven. Pressure multiplies, and emotions are visible in every gesture. Here, patience and courage coexist. You must pick your moments, recognizing when to wait for others to self-destruct and when to strike. Many beginners think the final table is about winning every pot. It's not. It's about lasting long enough for others to fall. Every pay jump matters. Every fold carries value. Playing small pots well often earns more than chasing big ones recklessly. At its heart, tournament poker is a lesson in adaptation. It teaches you to shift gears, to read tempo, and to let structure guide your discipline. The blinds are like waves. You can't fight them forever, but you can learn to move with their rhythm. If cash games teach patience, tournaments teach perspective. They remind you that no single hand defines you, and that sometimes the best move is survival itself. When the cards fall your way, accept it quietly. When they don't, leave the table the same way you sat down, calm, aware, and ready to return. Because the tournament, like life, rewards not just the bold but the composed. Poker is a game of information and discipline, but beneath the logic lies something harder to master: emotion. Every player who has sat long enough at the table knows that the real battle doesn't happen in the cards. It happens in the mind. The chips, the flops, the wins, and the losses are all surface ripples. What determines your future in poker is how steady you can remain beneath them. Every session carries emotional waves. The joy of winning a big pot, the sting of a bad beat, the frustration of folding 10 hands in a row. These feelings are natural. You can't suppress them completely, but you can decide how much power they have over your decisions. Emotional control doesn't mean being cold, it means staying conscious. It's the ability to experience the rise and fall without letting either change your course. Most beginners underestimate the effect of emotion. They believe they're thinking clearly, even when they're not. They take a bad beat and tell themselves they're fine. But minutes later they start calling too often, chasing losses, forcing plays that don't make sense. This is what poker calls tilt, the quiet unraveling of judgment under emotional pressure. Tilt can wear many faces: anger, impatience, revenge, or even overconfidence after a big win. Whatever form it takes, it turns thought into noise. To understand emotional control, you have to recognize how tilt starts. It rarely begins with disaster. More often it begins with irritation, a small sense of unfairness or frustration that goes unnoticed. You fold a good hand that would have won, and the mind whispers, "You should have played it." You lose a coin flip and think, "You're due to win one." These thoughts feel harmless, but they're invitations to chaos. The moment you start playing to balance emotion instead of probability, the game changes. The first step to control is awareness. You have to learn to feel when your pulse rises, when your breathing quickens, when your attention narrows. These are signs that your thinking mind is slipping into your emotional one. The second step is pause. When you feel that shift, take a hand off, stand up, stretch, breathe. The chips will still be there. You're not wasting time, you're protecting your clarity. There's a calm truth about poker. No single hand ever decides your future, but one emotional reaction can. Many great players have lost entire sessions because they refuse to step back after a bad beat. They try to win it back, as if justice could be enforced by force of will. But the cards have no memory. The only one keeping score is you. Emotional control also means understanding ego. Every player carries one, whether they admit it or not. Ego wants to prove something for Chloe, that you're smarter than the table, that you can outplay the regulars, that you can't be bluffed. It's the same voice that keeps you in hands you should fold and drives you to call down an opponent just to see. Ego disguises itself as confidence, but it feeds on insecurity. True confidence doesn't need proof, it simply acts with quiet certainty. There's a story about a player named Mark, a quiet man who loved poker for its stillness. One night, after hours of patient play, he got pocket aces, the kind of hand players dream of. He raised, got re-raised, and then saw an all-in shove. He called instantly. His opponent turned over pocket kings. It was perfect. The flop came clean. The turn too, but the river brought the king. The table gasped. Mark just sat still. He didn't curse, didn't sigh. He stacked his remaining chips, smiled, and said, "Nice hand." A player next to him couldn't believe it. "You're not upset?" he asked. Mark shrugged. "Why would I be? I played it right. The rest isn't mine to control." That moment explains the entire mental game. Control what's yours, the decision, not the outcome. When you play from that space, something powerful happens. The noise around you fades. You stop chasing the past or fearing the future. You play each hand for what it is, a single decision in a long series of decisions. This awareness is what keeps professionals calm in the face of chaos. To build that awareness, practice detachment. After every session, good or bad, review your play as if it belonged to someone else. Ask, did I make good decisions, rather than, did I win? This separates your self-worth from your results. The cards can punish or reward, but they can't define you. Another tool for emotional control is rhythm. Develop a ritual that brings you back to center. A slow breath before each hand, a brief glance at the felt, the sound of the chips clicking between your fingers. These small actions ground you in the present moment. When the mind begins to wander into anger or fear, rhythm brings it home. The longer you play poker, the more you'll realize that emotional mastery is not a one-time achievement. It's a constant maintenance of balance. Even experienced players tilt. The difference is, they recognize it sooner and recover faster. They don't try to eliminate emotion, they learn to work with it. And when you begin to master this side of the game, your results and your enjoyment change completely. You stop blaming luck, and you start respecting variance. You realize that losing hands doesn't make you unlucky, it makes you human. You accept that poker, like life, contains streaks of both fortune and misfortune, and the only real victory is in how you carry yourself through them. The irony is that once you stop chasing results, better results come. When you no longer need to win every hand, you make better folds. When you stop trying to prove you're right, you start making calm, objective calls. When you stop fearing loss, you find your timing again. Poker becomes meditative, not in the sense of being passive, but in being fully aware. Every action slows down. Every thought becomes deliberate. You see others tilting, chasing, unraveling, and instead of getting drawn in, you stay still. That stillness becomes your greatest edge. In the end, emotional control in poker isn't about hiding feelings. It's about seeing them clearly and choosing not to obey them. When you can lose a hand without losing your composure, you've already won something greater. Poker will always test you. It's supposed to. The cards will tempt, tease, and betray you. The deck has no mercy, but it doesn't need to. Because when your mind is calm, no bad beat can touch you for long. You play, you breathe, you reset, you fold, you what? You wait. And slowly, your discipline turns into peace. That peace is where poker truly begins. Once the fundamentals are in place, position, patience, perception, emotional control, the game begins to reveal its subtler layers. What once looked random starts to feel like rhythm. What once felt like guessing begins to resemble reading. This is where deeper insight lives, not in memorizing charts or copying professionals, but in learning to see connections between things that others overlook. At the surface, poker is about cards. Beneath that, it's about information. And beneath that, it's about timing. The more aware you become of how these layers interact, the more your game transforms from reaction to intuition. Timing is one of the most misunderstood aspects of poker. Most players think of it as luck, being in the right place at the right moment. But real timing comes from awareness. It's knowing when an opponent's pattern is ready to be challenged. It's recognizing that a player who's been raising every hand will hesitate the moment you push back. It's understanding that a hand doesn't have to be perfect to be played, it just has to fit the flow of the moment. You'll start to notice patterns not just in cards but in behavior. A player who always bets quickly might be covering nerves. A player who pauses before checking may be trying to appear thoughtful when they're actually weak. A sudden change in tempo, a faster bet, a longer stare, often means something. The cards tell one story, the rhythm of the player tells another. Deeper insight means learning to merge both stories, to hold the logic of hand ranges in one hand and the intuition of human behavior in the other. The balance between them is what creates mastery. Consider a hand between two players who both know the fundamentals. One raises pre-flop, the other calls. The flop comes 9-5-2. The raiser bets, the caller calls. The turn is a king, the raiser bets again, the caller pauses. Something feels off, yes, the aggression doesn't match the earlier rhythm. The caller studies the opponent's eyes, their posture, the way their fingers move on the chips. Finally they raise. The raiser folds instantly. That moment wasn't luck, it was timing. The combination of observation, pattern recognition, and courage. The caller didn't just feel something, they noticed something real. But only players who have trained their awareness through repetition and patience can hear those quiet signals. As you progress, you'll start to think in combinations, not in individual hands, but groups of possibilities. When you hold ace-king and the flop comes king-10-4, you don't just think, I have top pair. You think, how many worse hands can call me? How many better hands beat me? How many draws might continue? This way of thinking, in combos and ranges, turns the game into a living map. Every card that falls changes that map slightly. Advanced players don't guess, they eliminate. Each action by their opponent removes or adds possibilities. By the river, they've narrowed the map to just a few roads, and their final decision feels intuitive, but it's built on quiet logic. Deeper insight also means knowing when not to fight. There's wisdom in surrender. Sometimes folding in the right moment is more skillful than any clever bluff. You might sense that a player who's been quiet for an hour suddenly wakes up with a bet 3 times the pot. You could convince yourself to call, but something inside says no, the story doesn't fit. Folding here, even with a decent hand, shows more mastery than calling out of pride. It takes time to trust those instincts. Early on, you'll second-guess them, wondering if you're being cowardly or cautious. But intuition in poker is not mysticism. It's recognition. Your subconscious connecting patterns faster than your conscious mind can explain. Every session you play, every hand you observe, feeds that hidden understanding. Eventually, it becomes your compass. One night you'll face a difficult river decision, the pot large, your opponent motionless, the room quiet. You'll look at them and just know. You won't be able to articulate why. Maybe it's the way their hand trembles slightly, or how their bet size feels too forced, but you'll fold and they'll show the nuts. In that moment, you'll realize poker has become less about knowledge and more about awareness. That's the quiet truth most never reach. The best players aren't mechanical. They're fluid. They know when to follow theory and when to bend it. They understand that poker isn't solved through rigidity, but through presence. Presence means you're not replaying past losses in your head or predicting future outcomes. You're fully in the hand, breathing, noticing, adjusting. The table becomes an ecosystem, and you move through it naturally. It's why sometimes, against a certain player, you'll choose to check a strong hand because you sense they'll bluff. It's why other times you'll fold a marginal hand because you can feel the strength behind their stillness. You stop thinking in terms of what's supposed to happen and start playing what's actually happening. This awareness also teaches humility. You realize that no matter how much you learn, poker will always be bigger than you. Every time you think you've solved it, the game changes. Every opponent brings a new rhythm, every deck a new lesson. The deeper you go, the quieter your ego becomes. In this calm humility, insight grows. You no longer feel the need to dominate the table. You're content to flow with it. You'll win hands that feel effortless, and you'll lose others that teach you more than any victory could. Poker at its highest level becomes a mirror. It reflects your state of mind. Impatience shows up as mistakes. Clarity shows up as precision. Fear shows up as hesitation. Peace shows up as timing. The better you know yourself, the better you play. So when you reach this stage, when you start sensing the flow of the game, treat it gently. Don't force it. Insight isn't something you chase. It's something that arrives when you're ready. Play often, observe deeply, reflect quietly. Let every session teach you something, not just about the cards, but about yourself. Because in the end, deeper poker insight isn't about seeing through your opponents. It's about seeing through your own illusions, the need to win every hand, to control every outcome, to prove anything at all. Once those illusions fade, what remains is pure presence. And that presence, calm, alert, patient, is the true language of poker. The casino was quiet that night. The soft hum of machines drifted in the distance, and the air felt heavy with concentration. A few tables away, laughter rose and fell. But at your table, time seemed to slow. The cards slid across the felt, smooth and silent. You stacked your chips neatly, the small ritual helping your mind settle. You'd been folding for what felt like hours, 10 hands, maybe more, just waiting. The deck had been cold, but your patience had held. You weren't bored anymore. You were simply still watching patterns unfold. Every time a player reached for their chips, every time someone sighed or smiled, you noticed it. Poker wasn't about playing every hand. It was about understanding the rhythm of when to enter. Then it came. Pocket jacks. The kind of hand that tempts excitement but demands control. You felt a small flicker of energy in your chest. The kind that whispers, now, maybe now. But you didn't rush. You just breathed once, deep and steady, and looked around the table. Under the gun, an older man with careful hands raised 3 times the big blind. He'd been steady all night, cautious. You made a note of it. A player 2 seats down, loose and impatient, called without thinking. Then it was your turn. You didn't look at your chips right away. You replayed everything in your mind. The raiser's steady rhythm, the caller's looseness, your own position near the button. You decided to call. Nothing dramatic, just quiet logic. The flop came down, 10-7, 2, all different suits, a dry board. The older man bet half the pot. The impatient player hesitated, then folded. The action was back to you. You stared at the felt, not him. You thought about ranges. What could he have? Big pairs, strong aces, maybe a suited Broadway? You had an overpair. You decided to call. The turn was a 9, close enough to be dangerous. If he had queens, you were in trouble. If he had ace-king, you were ahead. The older man paused longer this time. His chips moved forward. A smaller bet. Controlled, almost cautious. You thought about everything he'd done so far. The pre-flop raise, the steady bet on the flop, the slight hesitation now. You'd watched him for 2 hours and had never seen him slow down unless he was uncertain. The 9 worried him. Maybe he had aces, maybe kings, but not a set. You called again. The river came a 3, safe. He looked at you, then at the pot, then back at his cards. Finally he tapped the felt. Check. The room felt like it was holding its breath. You could feel your pulse in your fingertips, but your mind was calm. You counted the pot quietly and placed a small bet, just enough to invite a call, not a fold. He frowned, thought, and finally pushed a stack forward. You turned your jacks over gently. He showed ace-king, nodded once and said, "Good hand." You smiled, not out of triumph but relief. The hand had played itself, not through force but through rhythm. You stacked your chips carefully the way you always did. Around the table the sounds returned to conversation, laughter, the shuffle of cards. But for a moment everything had felt perfectly still. It wasn't a huge pot. It wasn't a story anyone else would remember, but you would, because it represented something you'd been trying to learn, the quiet power of patience, observation, and timing. You hadn't forced anything, you hadn't guessed. You'd simply let the hand unfold one decision at a time. Every bet, every pause, every breath had meaning. That's what poker teaches when you slow down enough to listen. It's not about domination, it's about harmony. The right action at the right moment, nothing more, nothing less. And when the next hand began, you didn't chase the momentum or cling to the win. You folded your next cards without a thought. knowing that the lesson wasn't in the chips you'd earned, but in the calm you'd found while earning them. For a moment, the table felt like meditation, the flicker of light on the felt, the quiet murmur of players, the soft click of the dealer's shuffle. And you realised something simple. You didn't need to control poker to enjoy it. You only needed to understand its rhythm, and your own. Poker doesn't teach through lectures, it teaches through hands. The best way to understand the rhythm of the game is to walk through it, hand by hand, moment by moment. In this sequence, we'll explore several hands, each revealing a different lesson about awareness, logic, and patience. None of these are extreme situations. There are the quiet, ordinary hands that form the real backbone of the game, where small decisions quietly shape your future results. Let's begin. Hand 1. The strength of folding. You're in early position. The cards slide toward you, ace and 10 offsuit. It looks playable. The temptation rises, but before you act, you glance around the table. 2 players behind you have been aggressive all night, raising often, testing every limp. You know that if you call or make a small raise here, you'll likely face pressure. You remember the principle, early position demands discipline. You'll have to act first on every future street. Even strong-looking hands lose value here. You breathe, steady yourself, and fold. The hand continues without you. Sure enough, one of the aggressive players raises, another re-raises, and a showdown reveals ace-king versus pocket queens. You watch as the ace-10 you folded would have made second best pair and lost big. You smile quietly, not because you were lucky, but because your reasoning held steady. Folding wasn't exciting, but it was perfect. You protected your stack, your focus, and your rhythm. That's the kind of decision that wins over time, invisible, uncelebrated, but vital. Hand 2, controlled aggression. Now you're in the cutoff, near the dealer button. You look down at pocket 7s. Everyone folds to you. This is your moment to build pressure. You raise 3 times the big blind, and the player in the big blind calls. The flop comes jack 5, 2 to rainbow. A good board for a continuation bet. Your opponent checks. You think they might have over to cards or small pairs, but not much else. You bet small or 1/3 of the pot. They call. The turn brings a 9. Not ideal, but not terrible. Your opponent checks again. You pause. Betting again could protect your equity, but you sense resistance. You check back, keeping the pot manageable. The river is a 4. Another check. This time you feel the space open up. A small value bet might get called by worse pairs, but it could also trigger a bluff raise. You check behind. Your opponent turns over 6-5, second pair. You win with your 7s. It's not about the pot size, it's about the process. You built pressure when appropriate, slowed down when the signals turned uncertain, and ended the hand with quiet control. This is real poker, neither reckless nor timid, but balanced. Hand 3. Reading the story. The table has been calm for an hour, but one player, a young man in a hoodie, keeps betting every hand. You've watched him long enough to know that his aggression isn't selective, it's habitual. You're on the button with king-queen suited. The hoodie raises again, and everyone folds to you. You call, the blinds fold, the flop comes queen, 8-4 with 2 hearts. Top pair, good kicker, a solid spot. He bets half the pot immediately, his usual move. You call, the turn is a 10. He bets again, faster this time, slightly larger. You notice something, his rhythm has shifted. The speed feels defensive, like someone trying to project confidence. You call again, the river comes a 5, no flush, no straight. He grabs a big stack and shoves all in. The board is dry, the story strange. You replay the hand, fast bets, no hesitation, constant pressure. Could he really have a set or 2 pair? The line doesn't fit. You breathe deeply, count to 3, and call. He shows ace-jack, a missed straight draw. You slide your chips forward calmly, not triumphantly. You didn't win because of luck. You won because you listened, not to his words, but to his timing, his pace, his rhythm. You read the story he was trying to tell and realized it didn't make sense. That's poker awareness. Hand 4. The trap of impulse. Not every story ends in calm victory. Sometimes the lesson comes through mistakes. You're dealt pocket 10s in middle position. A tight player raises before you. You call and so does the big blind. The flop comes king, queen, 4, not your board. The original raiser bets half the pot, the big blind folds. You hesitate. Something inside you says, fold, it's too risky. But emotion whispers back, you waited too long for this hand, you can't fold now, you call, the turn is an ace, the worst card possible. Your opponent bets again, bigger this time. Still, emotion pushes, maybe they're bluffing. You call again. The river brings a small card and another large bet follows. Finally, you fold. Your stack shrinks noticeably. It's not the chips that hurt, it's knowing that your calm vanished for a moment. You let impatience steer the hand, but you don't linger on it. You take a slow breath and remind yourself, every loss is tuition. From now on you'll remember how that impulse felt, the tightening chest, the rushing thought, and you'll learn to recognize it sooner. Hand 5. Turning stillness into strength. Hours later, the table has thinned. The lights feel softer now, the chips fewer. You're in late position with 8-6 of hearts. A speculative hand, not great but playable. You call a small raise and see a flop 4 ways. The dealer spreads 7, 5, 2 and 2 hearts. You've flopped an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw, 20 outs. Your pulse rises. The original raiser bets. Another player calls. You consider raising but instead just call. You're in control, not in a rush. The turn is the 3 of clubs. You now have a made straight. The first player checks. The second bets big. You pause. A raise could scare them away, but a call might invite more on the river. You call again, slow playing the strength. The river comes a blank. Your opponent fires once more, a desperate oversized bet. You wait 5 seconds, then raise small. They snap call and show pocket aces. Your straight holds. You win a massive pot, not because you were lucky, but because you stayed still. You didn't chase the outcome. You let the hand bloom naturally. Stillness doesn't mean passivity. It means letting the moment breathe. Hand 6. The river as reflection. Sometimes a hand isn't about winning or losing. It's about what it shows you about yourself. You're at a low-stakes home game, surrounded by friends. You've had a long week, and tonight isn't about profit. It's about presence. You sit with a modest stack and play quietly. You're dealt 9-8 of spades in the small blind. A few players limp in. You complete, and the big blind checks. The flop comes jack, 10, queen, all spades. You've flopped a straight flush, the rarest hand in the game. The table laughs at the coordinated board, not realizing what you hold. You check. Someone bets small. 2 players call. You call as well. The turn is an ace. Now the board is even scarier for anyone without a king. The better checks. Another player bets big. You just call again. The river is a harmless 2. The player who bet before goes all in. You finally raise, a small calm raise. They call, excited, showing king of spades and queen of hearts for a royal flush draw that missed. When you reveal your straight flush, the table erupts. You just smile. It's not the size of the pot or the rarity of the hand that moves you. It's the calm in knowing that for one small moment you held something perfect and let it unfold naturally. You didn't overplay it. You didn't rush. You trusted the rhythm of the game. Later that night, as you leave the table, you think about that feeling. Not the thrill, but the serenity. Poker at its core gives you these moments. Clarity, timing, and peace. Across all these hands, the folds, the calls, the mistakes, the triumphs, one truth repeats. Poker rewards presence. Every time you resist impatience, every time you act with intention instead of reaction, you step closer to mastery. You realize that winning in poker doesn't always mean collecting chips. Sometimes it means folding a strong hand and feeling no regret. Sometimes it means losing a pot but keeping your composure. Sometimes it means sitting silently, watching and learning. The cards will always change, the blinds will rise, players will come and go, but the one constant is your awareness, the quiet center from which all good decisions emerge. In that awareness you find not just a strategy, but a way of being, steady, curious and calm. Every hand of poker sits somewhere between reason and instinct. The logical mind studies the odds, counts the outs, weighs the ranges. The instinctive mind feels the rhythm, the hesitation before a bet, the sudden stillness in a player's posture, the energy of the moment. Most beginners believe they must choose between them. The truth is, the best poker lives where both meet, where logic guides the structure and instinct refines the timing. Logic is your foundation. It's what keeps you grounded when emotion wants to take over. When you understand position, pot odds, and hand ranges, You stop guessing. You start reasoning. You can look at a situation and say, this bet doesn't make sense here, or this call has the right price. Logic protects you from chaos. It keeps your decisions measurable, but pure logic has limits. Poker is not a math problem, it's a conversation, one layered with emotion, deception, and psychology. You can know every correct move on paper and still lose because the table is not a lab. It's alive, and instinct is what connects you to that life. Instinct grows quietly, built from thousands of small observations you didn't even realize you were collecting. Every reaction, every bet size, every tone of voice leaves an imprint. Over time, those imprints form patterns, not in words or numbers, but in feelings. That small tug in your chest when something feels off, that quiet confidence when you sense weakness. Those are instincts forged by experience. The mistake most beginners make is confusing instinct with impulse. Impulse is loud and emotional, is the urge to call because you're curious, or to shove because you're angry. Instinct, on the other hand, is calm. It whispers, not shouts. It arises from observation, not ego. Imagine this hand. Your head's up on the river with a medium-strength holding. Say top pair with a decent kicker. Your opponent bets big and something inside you hesitates. Logic tells you that their line makes sense for a strong hand. Everything checks out. Yet something about their manner, so the way they're too still, too rehearsed, and feels wrong. You call quietly, almost reluctantly. They show a bluff. That moment isn't magic. It's awareness sharpened by repetition. You didn't ignore logic, you expanded it. You considered something beyond numbers, human timing. Other times, logic must override instinct. Suppose you have a deep connection to a hand and pocket jacks, for example. They've been kind to you all night. You feel they're lucky. You raise, get re-raised, and re-raised again. Logic screams fold, but emotion, disguised as instinct, whispers, not this time. You call and the flop brings disaster. True, instinct and emotion feel similar, but they lead in opposite directions. Emotion drags you toward attachment. Instinct frees you from it. With time, you'll learn that logic and instinct are not rivals, they're partners. Logic builds the map. Instinct helps you read the terrain. Together, they make you adaptable, structured yet fluid. The more present you are, the more naturally this balance appears. You'll stop forcing reads and start recognizing them. You'll stop chasing tells and start noticing patterns. You'll think less about what to do and more about why it makes sense. The most composed players in the world often look serene because they've learned to let these two forces flow together. They know when to trust the math and when to trust the moment. They fold hands that others would fight for and call in spots that others would fear. Their choices look effortless because their mind is quiet enough to hear both voices, reason and intuition, at once. In the end, logic keeps you safe, instinct helps you soar, but awareness, that calm watching mind, is what lets both exist in harmony. At the table, when you face your next difficult decision, pause. Let your thoughts settle. Let your awareness listen to both sides. If logic and instinct align, act with confidence. If they conflict, breathe and choose the one that feels steady, not desperate. That steadiness, that subtle clarity, that's how great poker is played. Poker is not won in a night. It's a game of thousands of hands, millions of small decisions, and the slow accumulation of habits that shape who you become at the table. The players who endure are not those who chase streaks or ride emotion. They're the ones who build quiet, repeatable discipline, the kind that lasts through months of variance and years of learning. Long-term discipline begins with humility. Every session is a lesson, not a verdict. You won't always play perfectly. Some nights you'll lose because of luck and others because of yourself. The disciplined player doesn't collapse under either outcome. They record what happened, learn and move forward. It's a rhythm. Play, reflect, adjust, rest. In the beginning, this rhythm feels unnatural. You'll want quick progress. You'll want proof that you're improving. But poker's feedback loop is slow and deceptive. Good decisions can lose, bad decisions can win, and if you measure your skill by results alone, you'll forever chase illusions. Discipline means learning to separate performance from outcome, to judge your game by the quality of your decisions, not by the color of your chips. It also means managing your resources, your time, your focus, and your bankroll. These are the real tools of endurance. Bankroll management is the most practical form of discipline. It's how you protect your confidence. You never play with money you can't afford to lose because pressure distorts judgment. When the stakes are too high for comfort, every hand becomes emotional. When you play within your limits, thought flows freely again. The same is true of energy. You can't think clearly for endless hours. Professional players schedule rest as seriously as they schedule play. The disciplined beginner learns this early, that clarity fades without recovery, and that tired minds make expensive calls. Consistency also builds identity. The more often you sit down and approach the game the same way, calm, structured, aware, the more those traits become part of who you are. Even away from the table, you'll notice the difference. More patience, sharper attention, steadier mood. Poker becomes a mirror for discipline in life. Some nights discipline looks glamorous. Folding the right hand, making a perfect read, winning with composure. Other nights it's invisible. Closing the laptop after a losing session, resisting the urge to chase, or quietly studying while others complain. But all those moments count the same. Every act of restraint adds a small layer to your foundation. There's a saying among old grinders, the game doesn't beat you, impatience does. The players who fail aren't undone by bad luck, they're undone by inconsistency. They study for a week, play well for a month, then tilt for a night and erase it all. True progress is quiet persistence, the willingness to keep showing up with the same focus, even when no one's watching, even when it feels slow. Discipline also means honesty. You can't fix what you won't face. Review your sessions not to punish yourself, but to understand yourself. Notice your recurring leaks, the spots where boredom, pride, or fear take control. Awareness is repair. Every small correction compounds over time until your bad habits fade and your good ones carry you. Eventually, this discipline becomes its own reward. You stop chasing highs and start valuing steadiness. You discover that the satisfaction of folding correctly outweighs the thrill of a reckless win. You realize that confidence built through repetition feels deeper than any temporary rush. And when you finally look back after months or years, you'll see that the quietest choices, the folds, the pauses, the moments you walked away, are the ones that built the player you've become. Poker, like life, isn't conquered through brilliance, but through endurance. Each hand is a small act of focus. Each session a lesson in patience. Over time, those lessons blur together, until discipline no longer feels like effort. It feels like peace. That's when you know you've grown. Not because you always win, but because you've learned how to keep playing thoughtfully, indefinitely. When the cards are finally gathered, when the table quiets and the last chips are pushed toward their new owner, something lingers. It's not just the outcome of the session, or the memory of a hand that went wrong or right. It's the residue of awareness that poker leaves behind. That awareness is the real prize of this game. At first, poker seems like an external challenge. Cards, opponents, chips, odds. But as you spend more time at the table, you start to realize that the real opponent is always internal. It's your impatience, your fear, your ego, your need for control. Every decision at the table becomes a reflection of how well you can manage those parts of yourself. That's the hidden lesson beneath it all. You came to learn Texas Hold'em, to understand hands, positions, and strategy. But what you've really learned slowly and quietly is how to think with balance, how to act with clarity instead of reaction, how to stay composed in the face of uncertainty. Poker is just the tool that teaches those things. The wisdom it offers extends far beyond the felt. You've seen that the game rewards awareness. When you rush, you miss patterns. When you grasp too tightly at luck, it slips away. When you relax and observe, the game opens itself. Life works the same way. The moments that flow best are the ones we don't force. The hands that pay off are the ones we play with patience and presence. Look back at what you've learned along the way. You began with structure, the foundation of position, patience, and perception. You built discipline through folding when it felt hard, and aggression when it felt right. You learnt to control emotion, to breathe through tilt, to let go of what you can't control. You practiced trust, in the math, in the timing, in yourself, and somewhere along that journey the noise faded. The cards stopped feeling like chaos, and began to feel like rhythm. You started to see the game not as a series of random outcomes, but as a living pulse, action, reaction, reflection, renewal. The longer you play, the clearer that pulse becomes. It's the same pulse that runs through all meaningful pursuits. Focus, patience, adaptability, humility. What poker really teaches when all the chips are gone is perspective. It teaches you to handle variance, to lose without collapsing, to win without inflating, to stay centered through both. It teaches that every streak ends, every bad beat fades, and every decision matters less for its result than for the state of mind in which it was made. One night you'll find yourself deep in a session. The cards won't fall your way. You'll fold dozens of hands, lose a few close pots, and feel the weight of frustration creeping in. Then something quiet will happen. You'll look at your stack, your hands, your surroundings, and you'll feel calm. You'll realize you're still okay. You're still playing with focus. The losses haven't taken your clarity. That's the moment poker stops being a game and becomes a practice. Because in truth, every hand is practice. For patience, for perception, for self-control. It's meditation through motion. Every shuffle of the deck resets you. Every decision renews you. You fold, you breathe, you wait, you play, you observe, you learn. The rhythm of the table begins to mirror the rhythm of life. You'll start to notice that outside the game, the same patterns apply. The impulse to chase what's gone, the tendency to act before thinking, the power of pausing, listening, and trusting the process. Poker doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are, and then invites you to refine it. That's why the best players aren't just strategists. They're philosophers in disguise. They've spent years studying uncertainty, learning how to stay calm when outcomes refuse to cooperate. They've learned that what matters most is not the hand you're dealt, but how you choose to play it. In the end, the cards are neutral. They have no memory, no bias, no destiny. The only story they tell is the one you write through your choices. So when you sit down at the table, whether in a casino, online, or in a quiet home game with friends, remember what you've built here. Your starting hand plan, your awareness of position, your discipline in folding, your ability to breathe through tilt and trust the moment. These are not just poker skills, they are life skills. When the board runs bad, remember patience. When the pressure rises, remember composure. When luck turns cruel, remember perspective. And when the night ends, win or lose, remember that you've already succeeded if you played with presence. Because presence is the rarest skill of all. It means you were here, fully, not lost in the past hand, not worried about the next, but awake inside this one. Poker will keep teaching you long after this guide ends. Every session will reveal a little more about how your mind reacts to pressure, how your body holds tension, how your ego tries to interfere. And every time you return, you'll notice the growth. The longer pauses before reacting, the easier folds, the calmer wins. That's what mastery looks like. Not perfection, but awareness. So as the final card falls, let this be your closing thought. Poker is not about control, it's about harmony. The harmony between logic and instinct, patience and courage, confidence and humility. When those opposites balance, the game feels effortless. You see clearly, think clearly, and act naturally. The table becomes silent, the mind still. In that silence you find what the great players have always known, the peace of playing the right way, for the right reasons. And maybe that's the real prize this game offers. Not money, not glory, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you stayed steady, thoughtful, and true, even when chance tried to shake you. When you can fold with grace, raise with purpose, and walk away in peace, you've already won something deeper than a pot. You've learned how to play the long game, the one that never ends, where each new hand is simply another chance to be fully alive in the moment. That's the lesson beneath it all.